Teaching English to visually impaired students, an analysis of teachers' problem. Introduction. In Indonesia, English is intended to be one of the compulsory subjects in junior high school, senior high school, and universities. It is widely noted that English is important for the most common reason that English is a global or international language. In teaching English as foreign language, or EFL, teachers, as the facilitators of students' learning, take a variety of roles within the classroom. Teaching English as a foreign language is a challenging task for teachers, especially to visually impaired students. The students who are visually impaired must be provided with appropriate instruction in a variety of subjects, including language arts, sciences, and mathematics. To educate them in this subject effectively, they must be taught the necessary skills to enable them to learn to read and use appropriate technology to access and obtain information. Several previous studies reported teachers' problem in teaching English to visually impaired students. Strengths and problem, as well as the techniques and materials used by the 3 EFL teachers working in 2 special primary schools for the visually impaired students. Several teaching problems determined in this study, such as problems related to the students and families, curriculum, verbalism, scarcity of resources, and the use of teaching techniques. Referring to the studies above, it can be inferred that being visually impaired does not necessarily mean being unsuccessful language learners. Although human vision serves as a major stimulus for learning, with the assistance of teacher and technology, visually impaired students actually have potential for learning foreign language. Literature review: visually impaired students. Visually impaired is a disorder characterized by poor visual function that cannot be repaired by refractive correction, like glasses or contact lenses, medical procedures, or surgery. Visually impaired manifests itself in a variety of ways, including photophobia, diplopia, contrast sensitivity, or impaired visual acuity, loss of vision, visual perception issue, visual distortion, or some combination of the aforementioned. Not all visual impairments are the same. The word visual impairment also may be used to describe as the consequence of an eye condition and disorder. Teaching English to visually impaired students. In teaching visually impaired students, teachers ultimately should comprehend that students with vision impairment would face different kinds of holdbacks and ways to learn English. Teaching English to visually impaired students differs from teaching students with normal condition of eye. Visually impaired students cannot learn English by seeing objects, colors, shapes, visual expression, book illustration, digital images, animals, landscapes, skylines, architecture, transportation, and so on. Therefore, teachers who teach visually impaired students can generally have much more control over learning environments, teaching resources, and strategies that they can hope to over the qualities and characteristics of the individuals they teach. Problems in teaching English to visually impaired students. First one is lesson plan. A lesson plan needs to be made to know what is going on to be taught in the class. It is one of the important parts of the teaching and learning process. Lesson plan contains several components such as objective, materials, activities, media, and assessment. Second one is time management. Time management is an inseparable element of a school organization. It is the art of arranging, scheduling, and budgeting time to achieve learning objectives. It is a process which involves the determination of needs and prioritization of tasks. It was acknowledged across the globe that time management for teachers is more important than any other professionals because they are master of the fate of future generation. Next is environmental issues. Environmental issues or the condition of the class can affect the teacher's quality in teaching and can cause problems for them. Firstly, discipline has become a chore that the teachers must do it for the succession of the teaching and learning process. When dealing with discipline, the teachers need to be comfortable with their position of authority in class. Methodology. Research design participants and site of the study. The study was conducted by using a qualitative approach with a case study method. The participants of the study were 2 English teachers at one special school in Palembang, Indonesia. Convenience sampling was taken as one of purposeful sampling strategies to select the research participants that are easy to access and inexpensive to study. Data collection and analysis. Interviews and document analysis were conducted to gain in-depth information and understanding on the subject of the study. Interviews involves presentation of oral verbal stimuli and reply in terms of oral verbal responses. In the study, face-to-face interviews with the participants were conducted. In analyzing the data, thematic analysis was applied. In the process, they have read all transcription and started to code the data that were related to the research question of the study. Findings. In reference to the data obtained through interviews and documentation, teachers' problem in teaching English, the visually impaired students were categorized into 4 major themes, including 1. Time management problems. Teaching time allocation had been a crucial part of a teacher's daily lesson plan for the success of English and learning process. Second, students' attitude and behavioral problems. There were several students' factors that impacted the teachers in teaching visually impaired students. The majority of the problem were about the students' attitude and behavior. The students' attitude and behavior were mostly described in the participant interviews. Lack of instructional materials and equipment. Another problem that the teachers had encountered was that they had very limited teaching materials for visually impaired students, such as large print books and textbooks, audio, software, and hardware for teaching English to students with visual impairment. And the last one is poor classroom condition. Another problem that the teachers encountered was the poor condition of the classroom. A teacher complained that there were not enough air ventilation in the classroom. A teacher experienced that after sport class, when the students did not change their clothes as they were supposed to, the classroom became so smelly. This unpleasant odor really disturbed the concentration and comfort of the teacher in teaching. These problems had emerged because there were insufficient air ventilations in the classroom. Discussion. They found that there were several problems faced by the teachers in teaching English to visually impaired students at one special school in Palembang. Those consisted of A. Time management problems, B. Students' attitude and behavior problems, C. Lack of instructional materials for students with visual impairment, and D. Poor classroom condition. The findings showed that most of the teachers had encountered time management problems due to their limited teaching hours for English lessons. Teachers had problems to deal with students' attitude and behavior. Attitude as an evaluative reaction to some referent, for example, behaviors or objects on the basis of an individual belief that and opinions about the referent. Lack of instructional materials also posed problems for the teachers in teaching. They had very limited teaching materials for visually impaired students, such as large print books and textbooks, audio, software, and hardware for teaching English. Using involvement as a standard of evaluating the textbook is one of the different ways. Poor classroom condition had also become an obstacle that made the teacher experience problems to deal with. Uncomfortable classroom temperature due to insufficient air ventilation disturbed the teachers in teaching. Conclusion: based on the result of this study, there were several problems that the English teachers had encountered in teaching English to visually impaired students. The main problems were associated with time management, students' attitude and behavior, lack of instructional materials and equipment, and poor classroom condition. These problems need to be overcome, or at least minimized to give optimal learning space and opportunity for the students with visual impairments to learn English. This study might offer basic information of problems experienced by the teachers in teaching English to students with visual impairments. Thank you.